My sister, Clara, always seemed to live in a sunbeam. She was the golden child, the one who did everything right. Perfect grades, a prestigious university, and now, a perfect fiancé. His name was Mark, and he was, by all accounts, flawless. He had a disarming smile, a firm handshake that impressed my father, and a way of listening to my mother's stories as if they were the most fascinating tales ever told. To them, he wasn't just a future son-in-law, he was the missing piece of our family's perfect picture. "He's just so thoughtful, Maya," Clara would sigh, her eyes sparkling. "He remembers everything. The name of Dad's favorite golf club, the type of flower Mom loves. He even remembered you're allergic to walnuts." I had to admit, he was smooth. He moved through our lives with an easy grace, charming everyone in his path. But my favorite phrase of his, the one he used like a master key to unlock my parents' hearts, was, "It's about family." He'd say it when he insisted on paying for a family dinner. "Don't worry about it, Mr. Henderson. It's about family." He'd say it when he spent a whole Saturday helping my dad fix the leaky roof. "Happy to help. After all, it's about family." He'd even say it to me. "I know you and Clara are close, Maya. I want to be a part of that. It's about family, right?" I wanted to believe him. For Clara's sake, I truly did. But a small, persistent alarm bell was ringing in the back of my mind. It was quiet, easy to ignore amidst the chorus of praise for Mark, but it was there. It started with small things. The way his eyes would briefly glaze over when he thought no one was watching, or a story about his past that didn't quite add up. But I dismissed it as my own cynicism. I was the pragmatic one, the one who lived in reality while Clara danced in her sunbeam. The real source of my unease, though I didn't want to admit it, was tied to my inheritance. Our grandmother, a shrewd and perceptive woman, had left the bulk of her estate to me. It wasn't because she loved Clara less, it was because she saw Clara as being taken care of by our parents, while I was the independent one, the one who might need a running start, as she put it in her will. It was a significant sum, enough to be life-changing. My parents were fine with it, and Clara had never shown an ounce of jealousy. It was just a fact of our family. Until Mark. The first time he brought it up, it was so casual I almost missed it. We were all in the living room, looking at brochures for wedding venues. "This one is stunning," Mom said, pointing to a lavish estate. "But oh, the price." Mark draped his arm around Clara. "We'll make it work. We're a team. And a family. You know, Maya, with your business sense, you probably have your inheritance invested very smartly." I froze. No one ever talked about my inheritance. It was private. "It's handled," I said, my tone cooler than I intended. Mark just smiled that brilliant, disarming smile. Of course, of course. I was just thinking. With that kind of capital, there are incredible opportunities. We could invest in a business together, the four of us. A real family enterprise. Build a legacy." He looked at my parents. "It's about family, after all. Building a future together." My father's eyes lit up. He was a traditional man who loved the idea of a family business. My mother nodded enthusiastically. Clara squeezed Mark's hand, looking at him with pure adoration. But I saw something else. I saw the brief, calculating flicker in Mark's eyes as he said the word capital. He wasn't looking at me as a future sister-in-law. He was looking at me like a resource. Like a bank. Later that night, I tried to gently broach the subject with Clara. "Don't you think it's a little weird that Mark is already talking about my inheritance?" Clara pulled back, a frown clouding her face. "Weird? Maya, he sees you as family. He wants to include you. He's trying to connect. Why do you always have to be so suspicious?" "I'm not being suspicious, I just..." "Yes, you are," she cut me off, her voice sharp. "You've never liked him. Just admit it. You're jealous." The accusation stung like a slap. "Jealous? Of what?" "I'm happy for you, Clara. I just have a weird feeling. Well, your weird feeling is ruining things, she said, turning away. Mark is the best thing that's ever happened to me. He's trying to build a life with me, with us. Because for him, it's about family. Maybe you should try thinking that way for once. She walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the silence and the loud, insistent ringing of that alarm bell in my head. He had already managed to turn my sister against me, all while smiling and talking about family. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was only the beginning. The weeks following that first conversation were a masterclass in manipulation. Mark never brought up my inheritance directly to me again. Instead, he began a subtle but relentless campaign, using my own family as his unwitting soldiers. The phrase, "it's about family," which once sounded so heartwarming, now felt like a threat. It started with my dad. Mark would spend hours in the garage with him, talking about investments and business opportunities. You know, Dad, I overheard Mark say one Saturday, calling my father Dad as if he'd been doing it for years, I found this incredible real estate development opportunity. The buy-in is high, but the returns are practically guaranteed. If we could pool our resources, a real Henderson family legacy. Later that evening, my father approached me while I was reading. Maya, honey. Mark was telling me about a fantastic investment. He's a smart young man, really has a head for business. Dad, I'm not interested in speculative real estate, I said firmly. My father's face fell. It's not speculative, Mark explained it all. I just thought, you have that money just sitting there. It could be working for the family. For Clara's future. For our future. It was the first time my father had ever made me feel guilty about the inheritance my grandmother left me. I saw Mark's fingerprints all over it. Next was my mother. Mark charmed her by focusing on the wedding. He'd bring home fabric swatches and cake samples, making her feel like the most important wedding planner in the world. Then, he would weave in the poison. I want to give Clara the wedding of her dreams, Mrs. Henderson, he'd say, his voice thick with sincerity. But with my business just starting out, funds are a bit tight. It's a shame Maya is so protective of her resources. A little help would ensure Clara has the perfect day. It's a once-in-a-lifetime event. And it's about family, isn't it? Soon, my mother was sighing dramatically whenever the budget was mentioned, shooting me disappointed looks across the dinner table. We might have to cut back on the flowers, she'd say, her eyes on me. Or maybe invite fewer people. The pressure was immense, coming from all sides. I was being painted as the selfish, uncooperative sister who was hoarding her wealth while the rest of the family was trying to build a beautiful future. Clara was distant, treating me with a cool politeness that hurt more than an open fight. Whenever I tried to talk to her, she'd shut me down. Mark is just trying to include you, Maya. He thinks of you as a sister. He told me he's worried your money isn't invested properly and he just wants to help. You're twisting his good intentions into something ugly. The gaslighting was suffocating. I started to question myself. Was I being paranoid? Was I the villain in this story? Was I letting my cynicism ruin my sister's happiness? The breaking point came one Tuesday afternoon. I was working from home and needed a copy of my birth certificate for a passport renewal. I knew my parents kept all our important documents in a lockbox in their study. When I opened it, I found it surprisingly disorganized. Papers were out of place, and then I saw it, the folder containing all the legal documents related to my inheritance. It was on top of the pile, as if someone had been looking at it recently. My blood ran cold. The only people who had been in the house that day were my parents, and Mark, who had stopped by to drop off a gift for Clara. I carefully put everything back, my hands trembling. This was no longer a feeling. This was evidence. He wasn't just talking about my money, he was actively looking for information about it. That night, I decided to confront him, but carefully. At dinner, I casually mentioned my passport renewal. It was so strange, I said, looking directly at Mark. I had to go into the family lockbox, and everything was a mess. Even my inheritance papers were out of place. It's almost as if someone was snooping. My parents looked confused, but Mark didn't flinch. He just took a sip of water, wiped his mouth with his napkin, and gave me a look of gentle concern. "That is worrying, Maya," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "You should be more careful with documents like that. Security is so important. In fact, I was just telling your dad, once we're married and everything is combined, we should get a family safe. For everyone's protection." He smiled at Clara. "Because a family that's secure is a family that's strong. It's about family, after all." He had turned my accusation into another sales pitch for family unity, making me look paranoid and irresponsible in the process. He was better at this game than I could have imagined. I felt utterly alone, a stranger in my own home. My family saw a charming protector. I saw a wolf carefully examining the lock on the sheep pen. I knew then that I couldn't rely on anyone else. If I was going to expose him, I would have to do it myself. My family's home had become hostile territory. Every conversation was a minefield, every shared meal an exercise in silent tension. I was the ghost at the feast, the specter of negativity haunting their perfect wedding preparations. If I was going to find proof against Mark, I couldn't do it here. I had to become a detective, and my investigation had to be invisible. My inheritance wasn't just a number in a bank account. It was a portfolio of stocks and properties managed by a small, independent financial firm my grandmother had trusted. Mark's snooping in the lockbox told me he was looking for specifics, account numbers, holdings, contact information. He wasn't just a gold digger, he was a planner. This gave me an idea. He was too smart to leave a simple paper trail, but his digital footprint might be another story. I started with the basics, social media deep dives. His public profiles were perfectly curated, photos with Clara, posts about family values, motivational business quotes. It was a pristine digital facade. But I went deeper, looking for tagged photos from years ago, old friend lists, comments he might have forgotten about. I found a few old college friends and sent them casual, friendly messages, pretending to be gathering fun stories for a wedding slideshow. One of them, a guy named Kevin, replied. "Mark? Oh yeah, we called him the Phoenix. Every business he started would crash and burn, but he'd always rise from the ashes with some new girlfriend's money. The guy is a magician." My heart hammered against my ribs. Crash and burn. New girlfriend's money. This was it. This was the pattern. I pressed Kevin for more, but he clammed up, saying he didn't want to get involved in drama. It wasn't hard proof, but it was a blazing red flag. My next step was more direct and far riskier. The following weekend, my parents and Clara went with Mark to visit his Aunt Carol, a relative no one had ever met before. They invited me, but I feigned a migraine. It was the perfect opportunity. I knew Mark often used Clara's laptop, which she sometimes left at our house. He was careless that way, too confident in his charm. I found the laptop in her room. My hands were sweating as I opened it. I felt like a traitor, violating my sister's privacy. But I also felt a desperate sense of duty. I was protecting her from a man who saw her as a stepping stone. His email wasn't logged in, but his browser history was a goldmine. There were searches for Henderson family assets, Maya Henderson inheritance law, and, most damningly, how to transfer assets from a trust after marriage. He wasn't just planning to ask for the money. He was researching how to take it. I scrolled further, my stomach churning. I found his web-based email login page saved in the browser's memory. It was a long shot, but I tried a few common passwords. Nothing. Then I thought about his ego. His brand. I typed in "It's about family" one. Access granted. I almost cried with a mixture of horror and relief. I was in. His inbox was filled with wedding plans and messages to friends, all perfectly normal. But the drafts folder was where he kept his secrets. There was an unsent email addressed to a name I didn't recognize, with the subject line Phase 2. The email was a detailed plan. It was cold, clinical, and utterly terrifying. Phase 1, the wedding, is almost complete. She's completely in love, and the parents think I'm a saint. The younger sister, Maya, is suspicious, but they've successfully isolated her. She's seen as jealous and unstable. Phase 2 begins after the honeymoon. I'll convince Clara that we should consolidate all our family assets for a major investment. Using the legal documents I photographed, my lawyer thinks we can argue for control of Maya's trust by claiming she is mentally unfit to manage it, with her family's testimony as proof. The parents are greedy and sentimental enough to believe it's for the good of the family. By the time anyone figures it out, the assets will be liquidated and moved offshore. Easy. I had to read it 3 times to fully process the venom. Claiming she is mentally unfit. He wasn't just trying to steal my money. He was planning to destroy my reputation and use my own family to do it. He would have my parents and sister testify against my sanity to a judge. The man who spoke of family with such reverence was planning to methodically tear ours apart for profit. I took screenshots of everything, the browser history, the email from his old friend, and the draft in his inbox. I saved them to a secure cloud drive and wiped the computer's history clean. As I sat there in the silence of Clara's room, surrounded by her wedding decorations, I felt a profound sadness. The sunbeam she lived in was an illusion, a carefully constructed stage light operated by a con man. The wedding was in 1 week. I had the proof, the weapon that would shatter her world. And I was the one who was going to have to use it. The air at the rehearsal dinner was thick with champagne and self-congratulation. It was held at a posh restaurant, the kind with cloth napkins and waiters who refilled your water glass after every sip. My parents were glowing, accepting compliments on their daughter's perfect match. Clara was radiant, floating between tables in a white dress, her laughter echoing through the private dining room. Mark was at the center of it all, a king in his court, shaking hands, clapping my father on the back, and kissing my mother on the cheek. He was the picture of a devoted fiancé. I, on the other hand, felt like a bomb disposal expert. I had the evidence on a USB drive in my purse, a digital grenade that would blow this entire celebration to pieces. Every smile I returned felt like a lie. Every toast I raised my glass to felt like a betrayal. I had considered every possible way to do this. Should I tell Clara privately? She wouldn't believe me. She would see it as a last-ditch, jealous attack. Should I tell my parents? They were so invested in the fantasy of Mark that they would accuse me of forgery. No, the only way to shatter the illusion was to do it publicly, with Mark present, so he couldn't twist the story later. He had to be exposed in the light, not in the shadows. After the main course, my father stood up, glass in hand, to give his speech. He talked about how happy he was to welcome a new son into the family, a man of character and integrity. He finished by saying, to Mark and Clara, they know what's truly important. They know it's about family. Everyone applauded. Mark stood up and kissed Clara. This was my moment. I'd like to say something, too, I said, my voice shaking only slightly as I stood up. The room quieted, all eyes turning to me. I saw a flicker of annoyance in Clara's eyes, but Mark just smiled, magnanimous. I walked to the front of the room, near the small projector screen they had set up for a photo slideshow. Mark has taught us all so much about what it means to be a family, I began, my voice steady now. I could feel Mark's smug satisfaction from across the room. He thought I was finally surrendering. He's so good at planning for the future, I continued, plugging the USB drive into the laptop connected to the projector. In fact, he's been making some very detailed plans for my future, and my inheritance. A confused murmur rippled through the room. Clara's smile faltered. Mark's eyes narrowed. I know some of you have come to believe I'm jealous, or unstable, I said, my eyes locking on my parents. Mark has been very effective at painting that picture. But the truth is, I've just been paying attention. With a click of the mouse, the first image appeared on the screen, a screenshot of his browser history. Maya Henderson Inheritance Law. How to transfer assets from a trust after marriage. Gasps filled the room. My father's face went pale. "Mark, what is this?" Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "It's nothing, honey," Mark said quickly, standing up. "Maya is clearly technically skilled. She can fake anything. This is a desperate, pathetic attempt to ruin our night." "Is it, Mark?" I asked calmly, and clicked to the next image, the email from his old college friend. We called him the Phoenix. Every business he started would crash and burn, but he'd always rise from the ashes with some new girlfriend's money. The room was silent now, a heavy, suffocating silence. Mark's face was a mask of fury. "This is slander. You're insane, Maya. You need help." "That's funny you should mention that," I said, my voice cold as ice. "Because that was part of your plan, wasn't it? To have me declared mentally unfit." And then I showed them the final image. The screenshot of his email draft. The words Phase 2 were projected in large, clear letters above the text. I read the most damning part aloud. "Argue for control of Maya's trust by claiming she is mentally unfit to manage it, with her family's testimony as proof. The parents are greedy and sentimental enough to believe it's for the good of the family." The sound Clara made was a choked, broken sob. My mother covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with horror. My father looked as if he'd been punched in the gut. All eyes turned to Mark. His charm had evaporated, replaced by a raw, cornered animal rage. He looked at Clara, his face contorted. "You're not going to believe her, are you? You're crazy, jealous little sister? She made all of this up." But the evidence was too specific, too cold, too real. The mask had not just slipped, I had ripped it off. Clara stared at him, tears streaming down her face. Did you photograph my family's legal documents?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Mark's silence was his confession. It all fell apart in an instant. Clara tore the engagement ring from her finger and threw it at him. "Get out," she shrieked, a sound of pure agony. "Get out." My father, his face purple with rage, advanced on Mark. "You touch my family again, and you will regret it for the rest of your life." Mark, finally defeated, grabbed his coat and practically ran from the room, leaving a trail of devastation behind him. The wedding was off. The perfect picture was shattered. Clara was sobbing in her mother's arms. But as my father turned to me, his expression wasn't one of gratitude. It was one of pure, unadulterated fury. "Look what you've done," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You couldn't have handled this privately? You had to humiliate us? You had to destroy everything?" My mother looked up, her eyes full of tears and blame. "Your sister's wedding, her happiness, all ruined. Because of you. I had saved them. I had saved my sister from a predator and protected my family's future. But in the ruins of their perfect fantasy, they didn't see a savior. They saw the person who had lit the match." The days after the disastrous rehearsal dinner were a thick, suffocating fog of silence. The wedding cancellation calls were made, the deposits were lost, and the grand, festive house shrunk into a mausoleum of disappointment. The air was heavy with unspoken words and misplaced blame. My parents moved around me like I was a piece of furniture they resented, their grief and humiliation so profound that they needed a target. And that target was me. They weren't angry at Mark for being a con man. They were angry at me for exposing him. "All that money, wasted," my mother would mutter, sorting through now useless wedding favors. "And the embarrassment. What will we tell people? She has a flair for the dramatic, that one," my father said to my uncle on the phone, his voice dripping with disdain. "Couldn't just be normal. Had to make a scene." I was the family architect who had found a fatal crack in the foundation and, instead of patching it over, had shown everyone that the entire house was about to collapse. They didn't thank me for preventing the disaster, they blamed me for the mess of the demolition. I felt a cold, hollow loneliness. I had done the right thing, the necessary thing, yet I was being punished for it. I ate my meals in my room, listening to the muffled sobs coming from Clara's bedroom and the tense, angry whispers from my parents downstairs. About a week later, there was a soft knock on my door. It was Clara. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, and she looked smaller, as if the ordeal had physically diminished her. She stood in the doorway, clutching a mug of tea. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice hoarse. I nodded, and she sat on the edge of my bed. For a long time, we just sat in silence. "I read it all again," she finally said, staring into her mug. "The things you found." I made myself look at it until I couldn't deny it anymore. She took a shaky breath. "He called me his phase one. Like I was a project. Not a person." "I'm so sorry, Clara," I whispered. She looked up at me, and for the first time in months, I saw my sister again, not Mark's fiancée. Her eyes were filled with a deep, bottomless pain, but also with clarity. "No," she said, shaking her head. "Don't you be sorry. I'm the one who's sorry. I was so awful to you. I called you jealous and suspicious. I let him turn me against you." A tear slid down her cheek. "You were trying to protect me, and I wouldn't listen. He would have destroyed us, Maya. He would have used me to help him destroy you. Thank you." Hearing those two words, "thank you," felt like the first breath of fresh air after nearly drowning. I moved across the bed and wrapped my arms around her. She sobbed into my shoulder, and I held her, the wall of resentment and misunderstanding between us finally crumbling. We were sisters again. Later that evening, Clara and I went downstairs together. My parents were in the living room, the television on but neither of them watching it. "Mom, Dad," Clara said, her voice quiet but firm. "We need to talk." They looked up, their expressions wary. "I want you to apologize to Maya," Clara stated. My father scoffed. "Apologize for what? For her humiliating this entire family?" "She didn't humiliate us, Dad. Mark did," Clara insisted. "Maya saved us. She saved me from a miserable life with a man who was going to steal from us, and she saved you from being his accomplices. Would you have preferred that? Would you have rather I married him, and then he used your testimony to have Maya declared mentally incompetent so he could steal her inheritance?" She laid out the ugly truth so plainly that they couldn't look away. My mother flinched, and my father's face hardened, but the anger was now mixed with a flicker of shame. "The person you should be angry at is Mark," I added softly. "And maybe you should be angry at yourselves for being so willing to believe in a perfect fantasy that you ignored all the warning signs. But you have no right to be angry at me. I did it because, for me, it actually is about family. Protecting each other. Even when it's hard. Even when it's ugly." There was no grand, tearful apology from them that night. Their pride was too wounded for that. But something shifted in the room. The blame, so squarely aimed at me, had finally been redirected to its rightful owner. My father turned off the TV and sat in silence. My mother got up and made us all a pot of tea, a silent peace offering. The family picture was broken, but what was left was real. The coming months would be about rebuilding, not on a foundation of perfect appearances, but on the messy, complicated, but solid ground of truth. Clara and I sat together, sipping our tea, our bond forged stronger in the fire. We were the Henderson family, not the perfect, glossy version, but the real one. The one that had survived a predator. And we had survived because one of us had been willing to burn it all down to save it.